Hey guys, welcome to Deeper. We're a podcast and vodcast about the Bible, theology, and Jesus. We want to go deeper into God's Word and to God's world because that's what the word disciple means. It simply means student in the original language. So if you have questions about the Bible or you're probing or some curiosities, that's not just permitted, that's actually expected. It's encouraged. So Deeper is a space for learners. If you want to learn, this is a space for you. We hope that wherever this finds you, maybe you're in the car, maybe you're taking a walk or just hanging out at home, we hope the next few minutes feel like sitting at the feet of the world's greatest teacher, Jesus of Nazareth. He is the master. My name is Ryan John Gregg. I'll be your host today. I'm sitting here with my friend Lindsay Smith, and we are in a series right now at the Bay Church that is called The Great Compassion, Joining God's Mission to Heal the World. It's really focusing on God's mission. What is God's plan, his end game, and how do we participate in it? And one of the primary ways that we do that is through works of compassion. The word means suffering with in the Latin derivation, cum with, passio, to suffer. And the whole logic of the incarnation of Jesus is that God comes to suffer with us, doesn't stay aloof, he joins us. And in going through the narrow pass of death and out the other side to resurrection, God launches a new creation project. So this last week in church, we looked at the grand story arc of the Bible from creation to new creation, from the Garden of Eden to the New Jerusalem, with Jesus right at the fulcrum, because he launches the new creation project from within the old creation. And so this past weekend in church, we looked at the biblical bookends of Genesis 1 and 2, Revelation 21, 22, and some ways that they map. And we're going to we'll review that briefly, and then we're going to go a whole lot deeper to understand what the New Jerusalem is signifying. How do we have ears to hear as the first Jewish listeners all the many layers of resonance? We're gonna go from hearing like a xylophone, ding ding ding, to like a symphony, because there is a lot of texture going on here. So, Lindsay, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
And can I start by reviewing some of the things we talked about this weekend?
Please, I would love a refresh.
Okay, so we looked at 5 main connection points between the Garden of Eden and the New Jerusalem. And I'll just kind of run us through those just to get us back up to speed. The first and most obvious thing is that there's a lot of garden imagery. It's very lush. And even in the garden, there's a lot of precious stones that in Genesis, and in the New Jerusalem, there's magical trees. The tree of life comes up again in the New Jerusalem in amazing ways. And of course, it's there in the Garden of Eden. And the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that brings a curse. And, just as a curse develops because of one of the trees in Eden, in the New Jerusalem, the curse is removed. It explicitly says the curse is removed, and the tree of life has to do with that. So there's a lot of lush garden imagery. And this is why in the Old Testament tabernacle and the temple, remember the tabernacle was the little tent that the Israelites had traveling through. It's their portable church.
Yeah.
And then they had the real church in Jerusalem.
Yep.
Both of these structures were deliberately recreating Eden with lush pomegranates and trees and flowers and all this stuff. It wasn't just for decoration. It was to recreate the dynamic of Eden where God dwells with people, where the holiness of God can still cohabitate with humans who are not holy. Hence the rules for purification and stuff. That's so that people can not die.
Right.
But the bigger issue here, the bigger issue, which gets to a second element of the biblical bookends, is that it's all about temple thinking.
Yeah.
This is a place of privileged overlap between God's realm in heaven, human realm and earth. Eden is a temple. The New Jerusalem is a temple. But the big, blow your mind moment in the Bible is the realization, and this has to do with how Genesis 1, in its rhythm of creation through 6 days and variety of details there, Genesis 1 is making the case that the whole creation, everything that God's made is meant to be a temple,
Right.
the home of God. So a temple is not just a building somewhere that you have to journey to or whatever. It's actually God's plan is for the whole cosmos to be his home.
Right.
And that's part of what we see achieved in the vision of the New Jerusalem at the end of the Bible. I'm going to pause there. I've said a
Yeah.
lot. Do you have any questions?
No,
or-
I as you're talking, I'm remembering. I think it was a Bible Project video, but they had a really good illustration of Eden and the garden being and the temple being constructed in the same way. For you to think of it like an
Totally.
egg, right? You have like the shell, and then you have like the white part, and then you get
Yep.
like, the yellow part, which
That's
would
great.
be like the holy of holies.
That's the hot
you know?
spot. I love that.
Yeah.
That's a great metaphor.
So it was designed that way in Genesis 1, you're saying, and then kind of recreated in the temple. But then the vision was for the earth to new creation to be that way again. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what's the egg metaphor is brilliant. And
Yeah.
but what how scholars often talk about that is like concentric holiness.
Yeah.
So it's like the hot spot
Yes.
where only the high priest can go once a year
Right.
under special circumstances. Then a little bit further out, and more people can go a little bit more often, and then further out and further out and further out. But actually, in the Old Testament, the theology of the land of Israel is that the whole land of Israel is like a temple. The whole land of Israel is God's special dwelling. That's why
Okay.
doing sins that defile the land is so very important. But from a Christian perspective, that temple feature of the land of Israel is just prefiguring Pentecost. It's prefiguring the New Testament, where God's mission transcends Israel. It doesn't negate it, but it goes beyond it, and creating the whole world is now the promised land.
Okay.
And so I wanted to point out a book. I've brought several books because this is some complex territory. And
Sure.
so if you're watching and you'd like to go a little deeper, I want to point you to some good resources. If you want to go deeper than deeper, we'll show you how. Okay. So this is a collection of essays. This is a book called Cult and Cosmos, Tilting Towards a Temple-Centered Theology. Cult is a technical religious studies term that means essentially religion. So sort of like ancient religion in relation to reality. And this is a really a legit scholarly work that goes into the weeds, into a lot of this temple meets reality stuff.
Okay.
So I just wanted to point that out, and we'll have opportunity to point out some of these other books as we go
How
along.
long does it take you to read like a book like that?
You know, the thing is, you don't plow through a book like this.
Okay.
It's
encouraging,
kind of a resource that you say, oh, I need to read that essay and that essay.
I see.
So
Okay.
multiple authors have contributed to this. In fact,
Okay.
John Levinson, my doctoral advisor,
yeah.
they excerpted some of one of his books and reprinted it in here as an essay.
Oh,
It's a part
interesting.
that's relevant to it. So they're cobbling together a variety of voices into one volume with a common theme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because me even just reading a novel, I'm like, that's a commitment, like a size
Yeah.
like that. But especially with the level of just like makes your brain hurt kind of stuff. I'm
Yeah.
like, how fast do you plow through?
I'm a
something
very
like
slow reader.
that? Okay, I am too. I super am.
I am not a very fast reader
Yeah.
because I mean, and I wish I was. Some
Yeah.
people are incredibly fast readers.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's that.
Okay.
All right. So we're continuing our review from this last Sunday. Just a few more things that we see at the biblical bookends and kind of how
Yes.
they run. Humans have a task. Humans are a royal priestly creature that have a role to play within God's wider world, and that role has to part of the image of God. A central part of the image of God is God deputizing us, giving us authority to act on his behalf over his creation.
Yeah.
So this shifts if we think that all God cares about is human souls, and that's the whole point of the gospel, to save my soul. That's the point of the Bible. That's a very narrow view.
Everything else goes by the wayside.
God
yeah.
cares about his whole creation. Actually, God likes animals.
Yeah.
God cares about plants and oceans and soil and
Yeah.
and humans have a part to play. And the reason God cares so much about humans is not just because he loves us, which he does. It's that when humans go awry, everything entrusted to humans suffers.
Sure.
So that's part of the idea there. Both bookends of the Bible have kind of a love story, Adam and Eve, and he goes through sort of a death and resurrection. It says twice, for him, no suitable helper was found. It's not good for man to be alone. God puts him into a deep sleep, gashes him open, and then when he awakes, a woman named Life is there. Chava in Hebrew is the name of Eve. Chava.
I never saw that as a death and resurrection. Him
Yeah.
going to the deep sleep thing.
Yeah, even
interesting.
before sin enters, there's this death and
Yeah.
resurrection movement. And so when we, in the New Testament, we talk about Jesus as the new Adam. There's multiple resonances there, including death and resurrection. So, okay. And then in the New Jerusalem, the whole city of Jerusalem is decked out like a bride, is adorned with jewels and so forth. And the spouse of the people of God is Christ.
Right.
And let me just mention one thing right now about the New Jerusalem, just in case I forget. And I'll pose it as a question. So the New Jerusalem, you read about it in Revelation 21, is a big cube of gold.
Okay.
It's big. It's like this, like the size of Texas. A huge cube of gold. Can you think of anywhere else in the Bible that there's a real big cube of gold?
No.
That's okay. I'll give you a hint. The yolk of the egg.
Oh, the temple.
But what part of the temple?
The thing that's on the sticks and they carried it around. Ark. The ark.
What room is the ark in?
Holy of Holies.
The Holy of
There we
Holies.
go.
The Holy of Holies is a cubicle
Oh,
enclosure
yeah.
that is covered with pure gold.
Yes.
And so, again, this is where, when we come to the Bible, we have to like willingly detach from our engineering mindset that always wants to say anything in the Bible. Say, "Oh, how's that made? How is a cube of gold the size of Texas made?" That's actually the wrong question from a
Right.
biblical standpoint. It's what's it for?
Yeah.
What does it mean? And what it is signifying is that all of reality has taken on the nature of the Holy of Holies in a profound way. That's why it says later in that passage that there's no temple in the city because God itself is the temple. So the very function of a temple as a discrete holy place with unholiness around it, that very function has no more use because God has dealt with all things opposed to him, all things that are unholy. So we have to do some work to get into the symbolic logic of the Bible. Okay, so the last thing, just by way of review then, is that both ends of the Bible are characterized by shalom, by a state of all is well, by a state of there is no sorrow. Things are as they ought to be.
Yeah.
So, but there's a lot more going on too.
Yeah.
So,
Question.
Sure, yeah.
Can you? So you keep using New Jerusalem. Can you tell us the difference between the idea of New Jerusalem and heaven? Do some people get those passages mixed up?
that's a great question. So,
Or at least like what direction are you going with New Jerusalem? I don't know. Just
no, that's a wonderful
Yeah.
question. That's a wonderful question. So, in the Bible, the word heaven is used in some different senses. Sometimes it refers to like whatever's out there,
Right.
like
The
what we would
heavens,
call
the
outer
stars,
space.
Yeah.
But more often, it refers to God's realm,
Yes.
sort of God's dimension. And it doesn't mean that it's spatially far removed. It doesn't mean heaven is like, 3 light years that way, hang a left, 2
Right.
more, it's not in that dimension.
Right.
It's near to us.
Right.
So when the Bible talks about going to heaven, when we die, it's talking about going to be where God is, but that's not the end of our post-death journey in some sense.
Right.
Heaven is a place of being with God, of rest, of rejoicing, of reunion. But the book of Revelation and other places in the book of Isaiah and some things we'll talk about make it clear that God's end game is a new heavens and a new earth. And that's in a material sense. It's not immaterial, disembodied. It's a real
And so that's what you're talking about today.
That's
Yeah.
what we're talking about,
Okay.
and we'll talk more about the new heavens and the new earth. And so the New Jerusalem, one of the things that's important about the New Jerusalem is that it is coming, it says it is coming down from heaven to earth. And the very direction of that challenges some of our assumptions that the whole point of believing in God is to go the other way,
go away.
to go from the
Yeah.
earth to heaven.
Yeah.
But the New Jerusalem's coming from heaven to earth.
Yeah.
And it has to do with God designed the universe, like we talked about, it's temple shaped. It's meant to merge God's realm and our realm. And God delights in materiality. One of the main lessons of Jesus' incarnation is that bodies matter to God. And if bodies didn't matter to God, then why was Jesus bodily resurrected?
Sure.
Why didn't Jesus, his spirit was freed from that pesky body thing. No, it's God cares about materiality, and yet it's infected with a decay principle, a broken disease principle, whatever you want to call it. God's going to heal that. As it says in, I believe, Romans and 1 Corinthians, when Jesus is resurrected, he's no longer liable to death. And what becomes true of his body will become true of the bodies of those who are in him. So,
Yeah.
Great question.
Sorry.
No, it's a great question.
We should talk about that before
Yes.
moving on.
Was that helpful? Do you understand?
Yeah, that's
okay.
great.
All right. So let's turn a little bit to the New Jerusalem.
Okay.
The first thing to say, we gotta back up the truck though and talk for a moment about the Book of Revelation.
Yes.
The Book of Revelation has been called like the Bible's final exam because, and this is a bit of an irony, the Book of Revelation quotes from the Old Testament less than any book in the New Testament. There are no pure quotes. And yet its allusions to the Old Testament blows away any other book in the New Testament. It is saturated. It is, in fact, here, let me just point out a couple resources while I'm thinking about it. One of the best scholars of the Book of Revelation, if you're interested, his name is Richard Bauckham, British scholar, very faithful. Here's 2 books, and this is common for scholars to do. They'll like put out like the big book and then write sort of a condensed, more accessible version. So this book is called The Climax of Prophecy, Studies on the Book of Revelation.
Okay.
Big scholarly tome, but, accessible. It's just bigger.
Yeah.
This book, a little smaller, I read it in college, and it was so very helpful. It's called The Theology of the Book of Revelation.
Cool.
Same guy, but it's compressed. We'll
Like
put
it.
the links for all these books, by the way, in the show notes if you want to follow up on them. Okay, so have a look at that. 2 other books. One, Eugene Peterson, who wrote The Message and several other books. He wrote a book called Reversed Thunder, The Revelation of John and the Praying Imagination. It's beautiful.
Ooh, that subtitle's good.
Oh, yeah. Peterson's a poet.
Yeah.
And the person who wrote the Book of Revelation is a poet.
Yeah.
And so Peterson is in his wheelhouse with this book. It's a beautiful book. And then lastly, this is a great series. It's N.T. Wright's For Everyone series. And so it's a companion volume to every book in the New Testament. So this one is Revelation for Everyone. And it's just excellent. It takes you passage by passage. It's informed by the best scholarship, and yet it has a pastoral flavor. It's very...
Oh, that's great.
It's, if this is a very good
Does he have
volume.
more books of the... Oh, I'm sure he has more books of the Bible. Does he have every book of the Bible?
All the New Testament.
Wow.
From Matthew through Revelation.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great.
So back to the Bible's final exam and so forth. We sometimes talk about like hyperlinks and stuff like
Yes.
that. Now those links come with different strength. There's a variety of different taxonomies where, scholars will put forward different models. But you could basically say, like, at the top, there's like a quotation. And this is where, like, the New Testament's like, as Isaiah said, da, 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 da. It's like a quotation.
Right.
Below that could be called like an allusion.
Okay.
It's like if you've read the Old Testament and you read such and such think about like how John starts his gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God.
Yeah,
If you
it's
know the Bible, you're
Genesis.
like,
Yeah.
in the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is like a new Genesis.
Yeah.
It's an allusion. And then beneath that, we could call it maybe an echo. It's not quite as strong as an illusion. It seems to be there.
Yeah.
And this is where there's a dimension of art or artistic judgment in being a good reader of the New Testament, because you have to make decisions about, is there really something there or is there not? And by the way, here's a huge, this is a very important idea, that what the New Testament is doing with the Old Testament in terms of allusions and echoes and so forth, the Old Testament is doing with itself.
Okay.
The Old Testament has a rich inner dialogue. It is part of, in my view, part of the inspired quality of it. That, for example, when you read the story of Moses, you can see that there are Moses-flavored aspects of David's life, of Joseph's life, of the people Israel as a whole, and so it's like an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And so you're getting these multiple layers that play off each other.
Yeah.
So it's not enough when we read the New Testament to just say, gee, I wonder how the Old Testament uses this. You flip back to the Old Testament and you find the one verse. Well, first of all, you got to read the whole context. But then there's another layer that will unlock a great deal for you, which is to say, okay, now I'm back in this Old Testament context. What is it doing in the larger collection of ancient Israel scriptures?
Yeah.
And so it's like there's this is part of why we talk about the Bible as a lifetime of meditative discovery, because there's endless depth to all these things. Okay. So
I have a funny story about context.
Yeah, please.
Okay. It doesn't super relate, but it's funny.
About what?
Context.
Okay.
Making sure you're reading in context.
Yep.
So I was looking. I was worship team, right? That's the main team I'm a part of, and was like looking for like a nice verse to be like, sing unto the Lord. And there was one verse I again just searched it in the Bible app, and it said, and I heard singing and I heard music, and I was like, ooh, that sounds great. And I was like, I should get the context before I like blast this to people. The verse came from Deuteronomy, I think it was, when Moses came down for the golden calf, and he heard singing and music, and it was horrible. And I was like, well, really glad I read context there, because that would not have been a good way to encourage the team. Anyway, proceed. Just a little funny.
Well, actually, Lindsay, like among the reasons I think you're a really great worship leader is that. Because I know you, when you're leading worship, I feel safe because I feel like I'm being led into God's presence by somebody who actually likes the Bible and studies the Bible, not somebody who's just got a nice voice, but somebody who's really pursuing discipleship and spiritual depth. So that's like so very important.
Cool.
So I hope that continues to rub off on everybody in our worship culture.
Yeah.
This is really important.
Yeah. Sorry, tangent. Go ahead. Proceed.
No, it's okay. It's all right. So let me just give a disclaimer that everything that's about to be said or the things I'm about to point out are really kind of the tip of the iceberg. And again, there is deeper beyond deeper. If this is the deeper podcast, like this isn't the final word. There's actually so very much here. So with that said, let me point out a few key ways in which the person who wrote the book of Revelation, John, who I believe has an authentic vision. He's not just sitting there reading the Bible and putting together random, it's not a scrapbook of his prophetic muses. Yeah. I think he's really seeing something. But what he's seeing is so deeply coherent with what God has already revealed to the people of Israel in the past. And so it's not an either or. It's not either he just saw something purely randomly new and just wrote it down verbatim, or he didn't really see anything, but he just knows the Bible really well and put together kind of a beautiful pastiche. Okay. It's actually both. Yeah. And if you study the book of Revelation from a scholarly perspective, you can understand especially why some might be tempted to think it's just a work of scribal art, because it is so deeply saturated at so many interlocking layers with Old Testament stuff. So, but we're focusing on the New Jerusalem, and just want to give you some ideas of where this is coming from. So, Revelation 21:1 says this, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more." And I think recently we talked about how the sea
Chaos.
in the Bible, yes, it's this place of chaos and
Yeah.
forces opposed to God. So when it says, again, the sea was no more, we should not indulge our engineering imagination to say, why did the Pacific evaporate?
There's no
That's very
water.
troubling.
Yeah.
That's not what it's saying.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with thinking with an engineering mindset, provided it's like applied in its right context.
Yeah.
What it's saying is all things opposed to God's reign, all things opposed to God's designs have been dealt with once for all. The sea is no more. And that's why
Yeah.
Jesus did a lot of sea miracles.
Yeah.
He walks on it. He calms it. He's the boss of the sea.
Right.
And that's deeply meaningful
Yeah.
in the Bible. Okay. But where's this idea of the new heavens and the new earth coming from? And we can look, like, let me read to you from Isaiah 65. I should have tabulated all these because then I could find them a lot quicker, but here we go.
Sword drill.
Yeah. Okay. Isaiah 65. "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind, but be glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem to be a joy, and her people to be a gladness." So notice how new heavens and new earth is linked up with Jerusalem here. "I will rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people. No more shall be heard in it the sound of weeping and the cry of distress. No more shall there be an infant who lives but a few days." And it goes on. And in that vein, let me mention why Jerusalem. What's the big deal about Jerusalem? Is it fits squarely into the temple theology conversation. Jerusalem is the place of the temple. And so that's why Jerusalem and New Jerusalem as an extension of that is so important in this. Okay, so we see the Old Testament antecedent of new heavens, new earth. Another thing that's beautiful is this in verse 7 of Revelation 21. It says this, "The one who conquers," and remember in the letters at the beginning of the book, that's a repetitive phrase. In the letters to the 7 churches, to the one who conquers, I give a new name. To the one who conquers, I give a share in the tree of life, and so forth. To the one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. Now, the Bible has used son language. You will be the son of God in many places throughout the Old Testament. Think of 2 Samuel 7. God makes a covenant with David and with David's son and David's heirs, and says, if your sons keep my commandments, my covenant, they will be my sons, and I will be like a father to them. And of course, you could back up the truck to Exodus chapter 4, where God calls Israel his firstborn son.
Yeah.
And so Jesus is the Son of God, but in many ways, I guess, as the representative of Israel, as the heir to the Davidic throne, and then in a whole new way for the New Testament, in that he is actually part of the Godhead.
Right.
He's part of the Trinity. He's actually coextensive in some ways, co-eternal, co-omnipotent, and so forth with Yahweh, God the Father, and so forth. So just giving a sense of where, and again, Isaiah 55 is in the background here. One thing that, the Old Testament has like 39 books. For the early Christians, some of those books were more important than the others. And we know also from the book of Qumran, or from the community of the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, certain Old Testament books are like uber important, and they are Isaiah. That's why Revelation's drenched in Isaiah.
Right.
Isaiah is important, very important. The Psalms, extremely important. Deuteronomy, extremely important. Exodus and Genesis, extremely important. Book of Daniel, extremely important. If you took just those 6 books you would have the basic core source texts of New Testament theology.
Yeah.
Which is not to say the rest doesn't matter,
Right.
but those are the pillars. So a great deal of, like, for example, like I just mentioned, was it an echo or an illusion that I just said? I don't know. I'm going to go with the quotation. In Isaiah 55, there's this amazing passage where God, like, democratizes the Davidic covenant. God says, like, as I've made a covenant with David, so I'm making a covenant with all the people of Israel. And we see that idea here in Revelation 21. All of us shall be the child of God, the son of God, if we conquer, if we make it to the New Jerusalem. And there's a cut. This passage is pretty clear that, like, if you are unfaithful, if you're cowardly, if you're sexually immoral, if you're a perjurer, blah, 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 you ain't in, because this is a holy town.
Yeah.
And which is not to say that, it's only by the work of Jesus that any of us get in. So it's not moralism.
Right.
All right, let's keep moving.
Okay.
Another huge Old Testament passage in the background of the New Jerusalem is the book of Ezekiel, chapters 40 through 48.
Okay.
It's not something I read for my devos. It's not particularly, like, cuddly, and
It's not in Hobby Lobby.
It doesn't give me the shivers. But what it is an extended vision that Ezekiel has of a rebuilt temple. Okay. And he goes around and he measures it, and he's like super. It's super detailed, and there's, like, water flowing out of it that goes and makes the Dead Sea live again, and there's all sorts of stuff. And that passage in Ezekiel 40 through 48 maps on in some amazing ways with the New Jerusalem. Okay. In fact, I got a list here. So in Ezekiel's temple, God's glory fills it, just like in the New Jerusalem. There's elaborate walls around the temple, just like in the New Jerusalem. There's someone who goes to great lengths to measure it, and, like, what are the blueprint stuff? They do that. The temple is square, just like the Revelation is square, the New Jerusalem. And this, by the way, is only the end of the pattern by which the book of Revelation maps Ezekiel. You can start at the beginning of Revelation and chart correspondences between the book of Revelation and the book of Ezekiel. And that same phenomenon pertains to other stuff. For example, the Exodus motif of there's that you could read the book of Revelation with one eye to the Exodus motif,
okay,
and get a ton out of there. But just like the climax of the Exodus, God frees the people from slavery, and where's the end point? They come dwell with God on Mount Sinai.
Right.
Just so, the New Jerusalem is dwelling with God. I will dwell with them, they will be my people. I will wipe away all tears from their eyes. They
cool.
are a covenant people. They're a priest. They're priestly and kingly. This is what Exodus 19 says. Right before God gives the 10 Commandments, Exodus 19, they come to the mountain. It's like the nuclear reactor. It's like fuming and everything. And God says, you've seen how I lifted you up on eagle's wings. I brought you to myself because you shall be a memlechet kohanim, I think. You shall be a royal and priestly people. And actually something amazing happens because in Exodus 19, God's vision is for a nation of priests. The whole nation of Israel is priestly. But Israel gets terrified at God's presence and says, hey, Moses, why don't you go be our mediator? Well, you go talk to him. We'll just do whatever you say.
Yeah.
So 2 chapters later, we don't have a nation of priests anymore. We have a nation with priests. We have a nation with a special subclass who actually sits around and does that mediatorial work.
Yeah.
But there's real overlap between the climax of the Exodus motif and the climax of the book of Revelation. I'll give you just one other example. Okay. Let's see if I can find it. In Revelation 15, boy, I hope I'm at the right place. Nope. Can he find it? Can he find it? This might be embarrassing. This might be embarrassing. I keep looking.
No, I think it's encouraging for the rest of us. This is how we navigate the Bible. Where'd it go? I know I read it once.
It's in here. I know it's in here somewhere. Na. Well, you're going to have to just trust me that it's in here.
Okay.
But anyways,
we'll do our homework.
there's a song. So one of the huge moments, first worship song in the Bible, really, is Exodus 15. God has just parted the sea. Everybody's standing there on the shore, and Moses sings a song. It's called the Song of the Sea. It's the first time in the Bible God's called a king. In the book of Revelation, there's another song of the sea where they stand by the sea, and it's glassy, and the people of God sing a song. Is that just random?
No.
No. It's the new Exodus motif that is from the very fount of the Christian movement, from the time that Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River by John the Baptist, which was signaling the re-entry of the people into the Promised Land, who crossed the Jordan River and so forth. New Exodus has been a major theme. And that continues from the first pages of Matthew through the last chapters of Revelation.
Yeah.
So that's another angle that we just got to learn to tune that frequency.
Yeah.
Because it unlocks so very much for us.
That's so cool. Even just like what we talked about, how the sea being like the chaos and the darkness and the things of life that are just hard even, but God calmed it.
Yes.
He conquered it.
Yes.
And so to think of the Song of the Sea, oh man,
yes.
they worship there, because that was a very visual thing of God completely calmed that chaos.
Yes.
And it even through Revelation.
Yes,
cool.
and in fact, in Exodus chapter 15, verse 1, the syntax of the Hebrew has caught the rabbi's eye, because it says in Hebrew there, Az Yashir Moshe Hashir Azeh Yomahu, which means it doesn't say it as you would expect the past tense to be in Hebrew. It doesn't say then Moses sang this song. It says in Hebrew quite literally, then Moses will sing that song.
Oh.
So it's a future tense.
Yeah.
And so some of the rabbis have said, well, that's because it's pointing towards the last days, that Moses will sing this song also in the last days. And so the looking to the past, and yet from that past inferring the future is like the classic move that's happening here.
Yeah.
And someone like John, who's writing to churches that are so much more aware of the Old Testament than we are totally picking up on all this kind of stuff. And so what this does for the book of Revelation, and I hope someday we get to do a whole series on it, but what it does is it really repositions it as a book of just sort of terrifying, bizarre, let's best avoid it because maybe it's about Russia.
Sure.
But
it's so true.
But it actually makes it a document that's understandable from an historical perspective. I mean, if our assumption is the first listeners understood what was being said.
Yeah.
They may not have agreed with it. They may have said, that's totally wrong and we hate that. But at least they knew what was being said.
Yeah.
So the task for us then is about doing the work to equip ourselves with those, sort of populating our inner library so that we can connect the dots in a manner similar to how they connected the dots, and then understand what's really being said.
Yeah.
And when that happens, the book of Revelation is just so very Jesus-centered.
Yeah.
It is so very perceptive of human society. It's so very hopeful. And it really anchors the outer bounds of the scripture. It brings us back in a way to where the whole story began. And I love it. So, anyways, I think we better end there because I think that's probably enough to chew on. It's enough for me to chew on for a while.
Absolutely. All right.
But let me ask one last question.
Okay.
What do we do with this in our lives? What is this? What then now? This isn't a pastoral podcast. This isn't a how to live your life podcast. But knowing now what we've chatted about, does it impact my life? Does it impact your life? What do we do with this?
Yeah, I think it helps me stay on, remember what my mission is, and to not even, to help me realign what my focuses should be, in even just my day-to-day life, and to love the people around me as best I can, to nurture them the best I can, as like, as we were called to care for the earth and the animals and whatever, all of that, like even my household, God has called us to do that with excellence and with full love. And so, to not clutter my life with so much that I can't do that anymore. You know what I mean? So that's a very, very, like a daily practical thing. And then beyond that, like what my mission in my life, like what my goals are, it helps align those and put them into balance, I think, too. I don't know. What about for you?
I think for me, it lifts my eyes beyond the next election cycle and the next academic year or the next, there's just sort of like, it like rips my calendar apart. It's just like, how would you rethink time?
Yep. Yeah.
And then rethink your ambitions and your goals in light of what the Bible says about time.
And your view of the world.
Yes.
Sometimes we can like hear the news or hear, and it's just like doom and like the world is like crumbling and it's like everything's going to whatever. It reminds us like, no, like new creation's happening.
Yes.
Like it's not all doom and gloom. Like,
and we have a part to play in it.
We do. Yeah.
It's not just something to sit back and watch happen. We are just like Adam and Eve. We're called to care for this. Jesus didn't come to bail humans out from our human task.
Yeah.
He made it possible again for us to do our human task.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we got to get on with it.
Yeah.
Because that was God's plan A. And it still is.
Yeah.
And he will decisively intervene at some point. At some point, God will make things right that humans never possibly could.
Right.
And we've got to remember that not to make the same mistake as Adam and Eve. We're creatures. We're not the creator.
Yeah.
So we got to stay humble.
Yeah.
But within that posture of humility, we're going to work really hard and with energy because God is writing the end of this book, and we're to be characters in it in some tiny little way,
Not
which
to
is
escape it, like be in it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
Well, awesome.
Good takeaway.
All right, cool. Thanks, Lindsay. Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely.
Hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, ryan@thebay.church. Deeper is a ministry of the Bay Church. We're in the East Bay in California, and we'd love to see you sometime at a service. You can visit online, thebay.church. We have services there, or you can come in person. We've got a couple campuses, and we meet on Sundays. Would love to see you. And until next time, as the rabbis say, shalomi, homies. Okay, bye-bye.